Welcome to the Moss Report with your host, Dr. Ralph W. Moss.
I'm here today to talk with Miriam Kalamian, who is a health counselor, nutritional counselor, and the author of a fantastic book called Keto for Cancer. And it's a comprehensive guide for patients and practitioners. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I sort of gave away the game plan here by using the word fantastic. I mean, I am I'm in awe, as they say, of what you've achieved with this book, and it deserves all the accolades and the attention that it's gotten. But I think many of our listeners have heard of the ketogenic diet, ketogenic strategy, and I would guess that a lot of people don't really know what that is. In other words, especially about a year and a half ago, it seemed to have an enormous peak, and it was everywhere in the supermarket tabloids, and just had its, the cure du jour popularity. And now it's gone back to sort of a little bit higher than it was up until let's say a decade ago. You're not that kind of person. You're not a faddish person.
No,
your book is very grounded in the science of this, and I'd like you to sort of share that with our listeners. Why it is that you have embraced and endorsed what some people may think was, an unproven treatment for cancer, and so what is really behind this? And then I'd also like your opinion about whether the ketogenic diet is enough, or whether there is a larger plan that would include keto, but wouldn't be just limited to one dietary approach.
Oh, you bet. Good questions. So I came to this from a very personal place. My son had a brain tumor. He was 4 years old. This was back in 2004 when we learned this. And we went through a couple of years of standard therapies, but this was not working. And we knew we were going to lose him. And I was looking up some palliative care side effects. And it was just dreadful that what they would be doing just to prolong this for a little bit of time was going to put him in the hospital or give him infections. Blood transfusions. It was not going to be a good quality of life. So in this research, I just literally stumbled across Dr. Thomas Seyfried's research. He's out of Boston College. He has a lab there. Mm-hmm. And I found it on Science Daily. And it was a ketogenic diet used in a mouse model study. And it was restricted in calories, meaning that it was not providing all of the calories. It was a weight loss type diet, but it was following the model that was used for the diet for epilepsy in children. That is a very high ratio of fat to the combination of carbohydrate and protein. So a ketogenic diet, a therapeutic ketogenic diet, is very high in fat, very low in carbohydrates, and adequate in protein. So that's where we started, was taking this mouse model research, a couple of discussions with Dr. Seyfried, who was very helpful, but he's not a doctor. So I'm trying to find a doctor.
A medical doctor.
No, he's not a medical doctor. He's a PhD researcher. And so I'm trying to find some help and cobbling together things, and scared to death that I'm going to hurt my son somehow, even though this has been used for kids. He was 7 when we put him on the diet, and 3 months later, his tumor stopped growing for the first time. So this was not a cure for him, but it gave us 6 more years beyond that point that we had with our son, that we weren't going to have doing things. We weren't tied to the hospital. We were, out doing things. He was in school part of that time. We were in Mexico part of that time, not at a clinic, just hanging out on the beach and hiking up in the mountains. And it was just amazing to me. I was blown away. I had hoped for any kind of response. And here we are living our lives with our little guy. So that's how I came to it. And I have to say that we did it much too rigorously for too long. I believe in really hitting it hard in the first few months or even the first 6 months if body weight can sustain a weight loss plan, a restricted ketogenic diet. But that's not ideal for a lot of people. So what I've come to more is, okay, I've got to look at where we're at in terms of stage and grade of cancer. What kind of cancer? How's this body is likely to respond to a ketogenic diet? And so there's a lot of modeling that has to go around each individual. And I wish that I could have put that in my book, but you can't because it's so individual. And I think, Ralph, if there's one thing I could go back and change, it would be like a big warning there of, hey, if you are underweight, if you are older, and I mean older in your 80s, then you really need to be very careful with how you proceed with this diet because it is a weight loss diet. The mechanism that inhibits the cancer progression also stimulates weight loss. So for people who are not able to do this, I have a different plan. So I see keto and low carb as the base. They're the core of this plan. But like you said, other nutritional strategies need to be in place. And one of them is fasting protocols. And there's a number of them. We can talk about them or not. And ketone supplementation, again, there's a number of those. And then one thing that people don't understand is a nutritional strategy, and that is you got to keep your body moving to whatever degree you can. Because in that eating window, when you're providing those nutrients, you want them to be directed to working muscle, heart. You want them to sustain those functions, not to be, out there for cancer cells to grab up.
Well, as you know, a great many cancer patients are elderly. I think 62 is the average age, but I forget the exact numbers, but many cancer patients are in their 70s and 80s.
Right.
What if they have normal weight, or what if they're a bit overweight? How do you feel about them doing ketogenic diet in that situation?
I'm very supportive of it for a few months. And then we need to slow down any of that weight loss that might be happening. So the thing about older people that's different than somebody in their 20s and 30s or even into their 40s is older people lose muscle mass really fast. And it becomes much more difficult. It's a huge challenge to gain muscle as an older person. So if you go into this the way that Dr. Seyfried's mice did, very calorie restricted or even fasting, there is that potential for the kind of muscle wasting that we don't want to see in cancer. And I think that's one of the objections. I know that's one of the objections that a lot of medical oncologists have to the diet is that people are going to lose weight. If they're overweight, they're carrying that extra weight, then that's great. We can use that to run their bodies and to make ketones. But if they're underweight, we need to fold in a lot of other things before we can consider dropping carbohydrates that low.
Wouldn't the fasting protocols, as you call them, also lead to weight loss?
Depends on the fasting protocol. If you do what's called time-restricted eating, some people call it intermittent fasting, but that encompasses a lot more. If you want to get down to what time-restricted eating is, it means there's a window of time during the day that you're eating, and then outside that window, you're fasting. So, just in general terms, kind of 8 hours of eating, 16 hours of fasting. And that is not draconian because a good part of that time, half that time, you should be sleeping or at least in bed. So, or, calming down after the evening meal. So basically what you're looking at, Ralph, is you stop eating at dinner, forks down, that's it. Nothing between dinner and bedtime, and that's got to be 3 hours in there. 4 hours for some people is better. And then when you get up in the morning, you don't just jump right into breakfast. You ease through the first part of your morning. Maybe you have a keto coffee or tea. But you don't start eating till later in the morning or even closer to noon, depending on what that 8 hours is going to look like for you personally. So with that type of protocol, that is helpful for the vast majority of people. That's where I'd want it to be, is about 8 hours. Older people, I might even open it up to 10 hours, or if they are anorexic, so they don't have much appetite, or their gut is so compromised that they're not digesting or taking up nutrients very easily, especially fat digestion, then we need to stretch that out maybe to 10 hours. So I think there's enough science to support that. And God, I even see, these places like Harvard Health talking about intermittent fasting, in a more general kind of way. More supportive of that than they are of keto. And I don't understand why that would be. But
well, a Nobel Prize was awarded for the discovery of autophagy, and autophagy happens after about 12 hours of fasting. So I think there's strong scientific, not that there isn't for keto, but I think there's, it's the new thing in a way, this time restricted eating. Plus, I think it's a very old approach, don't you? I mean, the word breakfast is so interesting because it tells me that our distant ancestors were conscious and aware of the fact that they were fasting when they were not eating at night. They saw that as a fast. And fasting goes back to the Bible. It goes back to, ancient traditions for both spiritual but also for health reasons. So I think it's kind of a rediscovery in a way.
That excellent point. I have to keep that in mind when I discuss this. And a good point on autophagy too, because yes, we want to encourage autophagy, and autophagy is the sort of the inside the cell recycling of broken down parts. So that's going to happen in that overnight fasting period. If we don't, because it's fasting, we're not introducing another activity. So we're not trying to digest a big meal. And so you can switch to autophagy instead of into the digesting mode. Yes. The thing about autophagy and ketogenic diet is if you're on a standard diet, so you're eating carbohydrates and you're not paying attention to protein, and you have your dinner and you go to bed a couple hours later, you're still digesting that meal, and you're still running off your glycogen stores during the night. So the glycogen that's stored in your liver. So by the time you wake up in the morning, you might be making a few ketones by then, but not significant if you're eating a standard diet. If you're ketogenic, you're fasting. This is more of a true fast, because all the signaling that's going on at the cellular level is that, this is, austerity time. We don't have enough nutrients to distribute them through every cell in the body. So we're going to clean up our act here through autophagy, but we're also going to be just directing nutrients to what we need to sustain us. So somebody waking up in the morning from a ketogenic diet is already well into that fasting mode. So the fact that they're going for, a 16-hour fast would be equivalent to a longer fast than somebody on a standard diet. So I'd like to point that out to people, because if they're having that keto coffee in the morning, they think they're interrupting this period of autophagy. And I wish there was science on it for keto. I don't have the science in hand to show you, but it just it's common sense that they're already in that fasting state when they go to bed, and they're going to be far ahead of the people who are starting with a standard diet. Plus, there are certain cases in cancer where you don't want a whole lot of breakdown. You want the cleaning up going on, but you don't want a lot of tissue breakdown. So, people on chemotherapy, in their bodies, their whole system's inflamed. So they're making inflammatory cytokines like crazy. And that is stimulating the breakdown of tissue. So we have to be careful about the amount of time and what we do during that fasting time.
Yes. Do you find that sometimes people are on keto, that it starts to lose its effectiveness or becomes harder and harder for people to maintain, whether it's psychologically or physically?
I think there's both, but people who are, I think there's a large group of people that can do it long term, but you can't do it at the very low carb end of it. Not comfortably for most people. I know there are people with diabetes that do this. They never have more than 20 grams of carbohydrate, but generally they're eating more protein. So the combination of low carbohydrate and low protein is more challenging on the long term. Just to use myself as an example, so I don't stick to a 20 gram a day low carb diet like that, ketogenic diet, because I'd lose weight, and I'm already at the low end of the weight. I'm fine. I'm healthy. It's a healthy weight, but I don't want to lose any more weight. So I keep my carbs around 40 or 50 grams a day, and that's a sweet spot for me. That may be different for somebody else. Somebody else might need 60, or they might not do well over 30. But I would rather look at this in terms of how's the body doing with this? And yes, the ketogenic diet, when it's first introduced, if it's calorie restricted, especially, boy, the body responds great. Angiogenesis is not shut down totally, but it's definitely slowed. Tumors shrink back. All the biomarkers of cancer are sort of rearranged in a lot of people. This is not 100%. But I don't believe that that's sustainable for a lifetime. But on the other hand, I also don't believe that people should go back to, just eating starches and sugars, eating, grains at every meal. This is crazy. This whole thing of healthy whole grains. What is so healthy about a grain? It's got a little bit of fiber in it, but so does chia seed, so does flaxseed. We don't know, we don't need to have traditional grains in the diet. They are problematic for a lot of people. And sugar, of course, is problematic.
On the ketogenic diet about 6 years ago because I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and it was remarkable for a few years. I felt that I really had, made this fantastic, rediscovered, I didn't discover it, of course, but confirmed the best anecdotes that you would find on the internet. My sugar really normalized. I lost about 40 pounds. I had 40 pounds to lose, but I basically really went back to normal weight. Bought a whole wardrobe of medium size instead of large or extra large size clothing. And that went on for some years, but I found that over time, it became harder and harder to maintain. The numbers started to go up again. And I had vowed that this would never happen to me. I was really so gung-ho and so excited about it. But whether through my own loss of willpower or just something about the diet, it just became harder and harder. I was doing the same thing, but not getting the same results. And I didn't go back to where I was. I'm still about 30 pounds below my highest weight, and I'm just at the top end of. I'm not obese, but I'm in the overweight category again, which is very disappointing. But I still believe in this, although to be completely honest, it just seems that there's a piece of that I'm not getting, and perhaps this is sort of what happened to us with COVID and with the inactivity and the stress, and there's a lot of things you could ascribe it to. I just wonder if you have any other clients who have had experiences like this.
Yeah, actually, and more around metabolism than around cancer. So I do see that happen. And I think part of it is just the aging process. So, like I said before, lose muscle mass. And if you're losing muscle mass, at the same time, people are quite often they're gaining fat mass. and as they age, normal part. So, but there's something about your metabolism that puts you into type 2 diabetes to start with, and ketogenic, although it can help, it doesn't necessarily cure the problem. So you look at something like Virta, where they have that that totally online platform that they offer for ketogenic diet for diabetes. Their goal, they would love to just like reverse diabetes totally. But their goal is to reduce the amount of medications and to reduce the amount of comorbidity that goes along with diabetes. So although your weight might be creeping back up again, have you changed the comorbidities? I mean, has your cholesterol profile changed? I hate to use that example, but that's one that people in the world of diabetes are always looking at, is cardiovascular disease. Are you sleeping better or worse? I mean, there's things that happen as we get older. Sleep becomes a problem, but that's like very important to me, is the whole lifestyle part of this. So when I'm working with a client, we do spend time on lifestyle. I want to be sure that they understand that there are things in the environment, things that they encounter on a daily basis that they have some control and power over. And like you mentioned, stress. That's huge in my world with cancer. Imagine that you got blindsided with a pancreatic cancer diagnosis, stage 4, Mets to the liver. They're telling you, that they're giving you the stats, which are not good for pancreatic cancer. And you're facing this head on. Where's your stress level going to be? It's going to be sky high. It's not like going to the doctor with a hangnail and having to do something short term and remedy, and then you go back to living your life. That's just not going to happen with pancreatic cancer. So stress is huge, and people approach it in different ways, but it does raise blood glucose levels, and it's a point I like to make with people. If you're trying to control your glucose, then you're also are controlling your insulin response. And insulin is a huge cancer promoter. And it's also in weight. When you're looking at weight, insulin is the thing that is going to store fat. So high glucose, high insulin, you're storing more fat. So what you said about the COVID anxiety, I think it's not just that people are more sedentary and staying home. It's that they're anxious and they're not as physically, they're not using that energy in their body, so it's getting stored.
Yeah, we may see some long-term effects of COVID related to this. There's an expression going around, COVID-15, meaning it's very common for people to have gained 15 pounds in the course of the pandemic, and they may find that without discovering the ketogenic diet, they may have great difficulty in shedding those 15 pounds again, especially in the older population. Tell me about ketone supplementation. I guess I was a little bit put off, as probably some other listeners were, by Dr. Oz's promotion of the raspberry ketones and other supermarket tabloid type of promotions. It seemed as if it was becoming yet another instant miracle cure for intractable disease, which we have a long history of in this country. I was a little surprised to see that you included that, but enlighten me. Let me know.
Oh, yes. I just had the first one yesterday in a long time that brought up raspberry ketones. When I said ketone supplementation, she told me she had some raspberry ketones. And raspberry ketones have nothing to do with a therapeutic ketogenic diet. It's not going to give you ketones. There are supplements out there called ketone salts, and there's probably, yes, I think there is at least one that has a raspberry flavor, but it has nothing to do with that ineffective, stupid product that's out there, raspberry ketones. So a ketone supplement is more about providing that ketone body that we would make, that beta hydroxybutyrate molecule, providing it in a form that our liver doesn't have to be making it. Normally when you drop the amount of carbohydrates that you take in, then your body has to make a certain amount of glucose in the liver in order to sustain some of the things that are glucose dependent. There's red blood cells are a perfect example. They don't have mitochondria, so they can only make glucose in their cytoplasm. So there has to be enough glucose. It doesn't need to be much, has to be enough for them. And there's also cells in the brain that, as wonderful as ketones are for a majority of the brain, there are cells in the brain that can't use that need to use glucose. So when you drop the amount of carbohydrate, you are using fat stores to energize muscle and heart. And then there's an excess of a certain little molecule in that process that then in the liver is converted to ketone bodies and put out into circulation. And ketone bodies can be used by muscle and heart too. But muscle and heart aren't going to use them if they are equipped to using the fatty acids. They actually prefer fatty acids. And I don't want to get too deep into the science there. I have it in my book. And there are other places to find the science as well. In my book, it's I have the basics of it, but I also have the specifics of it and how that helps with reducing cancer progression. And that is when you're lowering the supply of glucose through diet, then getting a little lost here. So, okay, you're lowering the supply of the dietary intake of glucose. So now I'm still lost. Ralph, where was I?
Well, I just want to give a little plug for the book. You mentioned the book. I'm talking to Miriam Kalamian, and the name of the book is Keto for Cancer, Ketogenic Metabolic Therapy as a Targeted Nutritional Strategy. It came out not long ago, and it's really a pretty fantastic work with a foreword by my good friend, Thomas Seyfried of Boston College, who is sort of the guru for all of us on this topic. I do want to ask you, Miriam, about what the lifestyle modifications are that would go along with this kind of program. You had said that there was a 4-part plan, and I understand about the fasting, the ketogenic diet, the fasting protocols, the ketone supplementation is what we were talking about. But you also have mentioned some basic lifestyle modifications. Have we covered that? Was that about the level of activity of the person?
Yeah, just keeping the body active. But there's also things about, improving the sleep hygiene. So if people are having some difficulty with sleep, or even when they're not, I might suggest that at least in the short term, they use a fitness tracker just to look at what their sleep cycles look like, because the feedback that you can get from that can be very valuable. Now, if you tend to be an anxious person to start with, you got to be very careful with that kind of data, because if you see that you have like a single bad night's sleep, you may get very extra anxious about that, and that sort of compounds the problem. But I think understanding how our bodies work, doing that work, removing toxins from the environment, that's another lifestyle thing. So an example of something that is very easy to do is don't handle register receipts. They're toxic. Don't microwave plastic. That's a toxic thing to do. So another level would be, okay, on the water, you could put like a pure filter as a countertop thing, or you can, on the expensive end, you can have your whole house, all the water coming into the house filtered.
You think that would affect blood sugar levels or anything?
Oh, no, not blood sugar levels. No,
Okay.
That definitely, though, introducing toxins that our bodies have to detoxify, or that they accumulate in certain tissues and then cause issues. Like sometimes my clients will have toxicity testing, and it might be heavy metals. But more recently, I've seen things like the toxins that are in Teflon cookware. Testing for those, or the toxins that are in the BPA, looking for things that mimic estrogen. So there are some doctors that are doing that kind of testing, and hopefully they'll have some remediation. But I think awareness is key. if you are aware that you're taking these things in, like people who golf. Are you aware that you're walking on grass that has been treated with chemicals? So, if somebody puts down golf on the intake form, that's one of their recreational activities, I'll remind them that they need to handle their shoes and their clothing like toxic waste. When they come into the house, it stays, at the place farthest away from the living areas, and it goes into the wash. Or the golf shoes just stay in one corner. They don't ever come out in contact with anything else. Yeah. So those are the kinds of things that are easy to do. Harder to do is if you live in a city, how are you going to, deal with the car exhaust? If you live where I live, up in the mountains, this time of year, we have the forest fires and things burning and settling, blowing and settling, and they use the fire retardant, and that ends up in the water and the soil. So even our organic farms end up being contaminated to some degree here. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you a question about the basic nature of the diet, meaning for most people that's going to be, do they eat meat? Do they go vegan or vegetarian? All the way up. A lot of people consciously or unconsciously identify the ketogenic diet with a carnivorous diet. And is it possible to be truly keto and also vegan or vegetarian? And what's involved in that? And do you think that there's anything intrinsically harmful or beneficial about eating meat?
Okay, good question. I get this a lot too. So there's a continuum. I live with this continuum of on one end being veganism and on the other end being carnivore. And boy, are there strong opinions on either end. And some of those opinions have some validity, and some of them are just outrageous. So I don't see either extreme as being the ideal for long-term use. Either one. Short-term, why not? But my example that I use with people, because I hear this a lot, I'm afraid to eat meat. I'm afraid to eat meat. Say, okay, if 100,000 years ago, if you had a rabbit in one hand and you had a bunch of tubers in the other hand, what are you going to go for first? And of course, it's going to be the animal protein, the high quality animal protein that's there, because our bodies really crave this kind of anabolic support, protein support. So, but if there were no rabbits around, you're going to be awfully thankful that you had those tubers, that you put those aside, because now you've got something that you can go to. But I don't ever think that was the primary food for us. I don't think that we could find a group of people anywhere that were subsisted just on plants. Our guts aren't designed for that. Our teeth aren't designed for that. And I know people will argue with me on that. And on the other hand, I also don't think that we do all that well if all we're eating is meat, because most of the people who are in that camp, if they're really dedicated to it, they're going to be eating what it's called snout to tail. So they're going to be eating the organ meats and all of the fat that's a part of it, much like a wolf would eat. Start with the liver. A wolf is going to start with the liver, and then he's going to eat the rest of this. So I don't think that's ideal for us either. So somewhere in the middle, there's a balance. And for most people, I think it's about a third plant proteins and 2/3 of animal protein. And there are nutrients in plants that I think are a positive thing for us, and not necessarily because they are antioxidants, but because they push our bodies to do things to bring it back into balance. Those are called hormetic influences. So the hormetic response that we have is, okay, we take in a plant protein that's an anti-nutrient. Our bodies, through billions of years, are having to deal with that in order to access the benefit from the plant. It has to deal with the toxins in the plant as well, the things that were to discourage things from eating it. So it brings us back into balance. I think there's benefit on on both sides of that. So I encourage people to think a little more openly. If they're strict vegan, I say, is there room for eggs or fish? If they're the strict carnivore, I say, can you have like a serving of a cruciferous vegetable a day? And by the way, cruciferous vegetables are not universally great for everybody. And I don't have a way of sorting that out. And I know that there's some testing that people can do if there's any question about that. But you hear things as though there's like miracle foods. And I think there are like really great foods, but I just don't believe that there's any one food that is the make or break in anybody's diet.
Right. Well, I think the more we've learned, though, about some of these ancient healing foods, like soy, fermented soy, and curcumin, turmeric. I mean, it's pretty remarkable that some of these are actually turning out to be immune checkpoint inhibitors. So you can theoretically save $1 million on cancer treatment if they were to explore the use of green tea derivatives, for instance, as immunotherapy. So then maybe there's more promise, to this yet. But I would agree with you that there's no single miracle cure for anything, and least of all for cancer.
Well, and Ralph, I think in cancer it is so important. This whole idea of the glucose is so important because what happens when there's an abundant amount of glucose in the system is that cancer cells can take up much more of that out of the bloodstream than when levels are kept low and steady. So there's always going to be some glucose in circulation because of this, the knowledge that we have of cells that do need glucose. So our bodies will make it. It's a sort of an evolutionary adaptation. Our bodies are going to make some glucose. So the other thing about cancer is cancer cells like to grow. So they have a lot of things changed in their wiring that can lead to growth. And one of them is more insulin receptors, more receptors for insulin-like growth factors. So both of those are very anabolic hormones, and they both track with glucose levels. They can be raised independent of glucose, but if you have high glucose and high insulin, you're also going to have high IGF-1, and you give cancer more of an opportunity to get that in and ferment it.
Yes.
So, and it's not just glucose that cancer is fermenting. It's also fermenting some amino acids. So glutamine is the one that...
Also glutamine.
Yeah, glutamine is the big one.
The most abundant free amino acid in the body. And this was a little bit, disturbing, I think, to people, because when Otto Warburg put forward his famous theory of cancer as being caused by damage to the mitochondria, which are organelles in the protoplasm of the cell, I think some people, including Warburg himself, thought, well, now we have the key, because if we can deprive the cancer of the glucose that it needs for this to generate its energy, we basically can kill the cancer that way. But it really hasn't turned out exactly that way. I mean, you're talking about, and as am I, about slowing the growth of cancer. In other words, depriving it of its main energy source because it has such a greatly increased need for glucose. But it has other ways of generating energy, and I wonder whether if you do cut back on the glucose available to the tumor, whether it doesn't flip over into using glutamine, which is, as I say, fairly abundantly available. In Tom Seyfried's, Tom Seyfried's laboratory experiments, he seems to have some drugs that will block glutamine uptake. Is there anything that you know of in our human environment that will do the same thing? Maybe be able to then cut off more completely the fuel supply to the cancer?
Unfortunately, the same situation exists with glutamine as with glucose. We don't even have to take in 1 gram of glutamine Our bodies will make it by taking apart other amino acids. So if there is an upregulation of glutamine activity, glutamineolysis in a cancer cell, it's going to find a way to get it. It's going to rob it from its neighbors. It's going to recycle. There's always things breaking down and reforming. It's going to recycle some of that and direct it to the cancer, to maintaining the cancer cell. It's going to upregulate the production of the enzymes that are necessary to make new glutamine. So, cancer does all of these things. But going back to what you said about the defects in the mitochondria and potentially causing, a flip, I think more of what's happening, it's not that drives it to change. It's just that there's always mutations going on. There's always changes within these cells, and the mutations that favor a switch to another energy source are the mutations that are going to stay and are going to thrive, and the other ones are going to die off. So it looks like we've caused this problem. It's not that we've caused the problem, it's that the problem was evolving. And just the same way that natural selection works in, as far as like our whole existence to this point, natural has been based on natural selection. That's going on in our bodies all the time too.
And going on in the cancer.
Dr. Seyfried has what's that?
And it's going on in the cancers as well.
Yeah, Tom Seyfried's got a great paper. Everybody should read it. You should post it on your site. It's called, I don't know exactly the title, but it's on Press Pulse. And it takes a look at it in cancer cells in terms of evolution, comparing it to sort of what happened with the dinosaurs in a mass extinction. So everybody should take a look at that. It's a very readable paper. But yeah, there are things we can do. Like we know that green tea and matcha tea inhibit this glutamine to some degree. It's a very mild glutamine inhibitor, but it's still something that we can do. The other thing is, just being careful not to take in excessive amounts of glutamine. I direct people away from using animal protein powders. If they're using protein powder at all, then it should not be a whey protein or collagen protein. I think we're only feeding the cancer cells when we do that.
Do you think that there's a way, some people have publicized the idea of starving the cancer, that you could ideally cut off all the fuel supplies going to the cancer? This has become a very popular.
Oh yeah, we could do that in a heartbeat, but it would kill us because it would be cutting off the supplies for our normal cells as well. So, that's the thing about glutamine inhibition. If you get too aggressive with glutamine inhibition, you're going to kill off the organism, because the glutamine is essential to gut health and immune function within the gut. But also every cell needs it. Every single cell in our body's needing glutamine. So if we were successful at cutting it off in that way and successful at preventing our cells from making it, then we'd be in trouble. And that's another point that Tom Seyfried makes, is that you can only do this like for a limited period of time, and then you will have to allow. He calls it closing the front door, not letting the glucose in, but leaving the back door open for glutamine. So you got to close both doors, but you can only do it for a short period of time. We'll get better at this over time. And most people are very aware, if they're aware of Tom Seyfried at all, of the drug with the acronym DON, D-O-N. But that one has been a tough drug to work with because it does have toxicity in the digestive tract. So, but this one that has come more into focus, and he's doing the research on it now, is mebendazole. Yeah. Mebendazole is an antiparasitic. So, it's being repurposed not for killing parasites, but as a anti-cancer drug. And it has a very low toxicity profile. I was reading some of the papers that have been on that. Is like even in small children, they can take high doses of this and have very minimal side effects. And he thinks, there's in the parasite, they know what it's doing, that it's inhibiting uptake of glucose to the parasite, but it's also inhibiting the the formation of the microtubules that the parasite needs in order to survive. So it's killing them off that way. In a similar way, it's interesting. In a similar, what's that?
Non-toxic chemotherapy.
Yeah, it's similar to the alkylating chemotherapies, exactly. So it's killing them off that way, but he thinks it's inhibiting glutamine as well, because in his mouse model, he's seeing some good effects. But that's down the road, and that would be a discussion that you could have with him when his research is ready for publication.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And do you think that there's a way to combine ketogenic diet with other treatments, including, let's say, lower doses of chemotherapy? Do you have?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So you get ketogenic, and you can combine ketogenic depending on what your personal limits are on how much toxicity you want to bring into your life. Some people will combine ketogenic, and they'll stay with low toxicity, like you said, low dose chemotherapy, or they might be doing something a little different. That can work. That can work for some people, but it's not a cure for cancer. And I want everyone to understand that ketogenic diet and any kind of therapy is not a cure for cancer. The surgical resection of a cancer, when that's possible, is probably the best option. It is heartbreaking when I run into people, when I'm working with people, and I find out that they refuse to have a surgery that could have been curative for them. And now 4 years later, they have metastasized cancer that's not going to be remedied with diet or chemo or immunotherapies or any of the stuff that we have currently. It's not going to be a cure. Maybe it's going to manage long term, and maybe they're going to have a spontaneous remission. Those things happen. But in general, those things in combination are not a cure. But that time period when somebody is newly diagnosed and naive to all treatment, that's the time to switch up the diet. That's the time to introduce therapies that are going to have the most potential to be curative, or at least to make the biggest impression on the cancer. And then just responding to like what that body needs, what that person needs over time. And you have to be looking at the emotional aspect of it as well as just the physical aspect of it. Like in pancreatic cancer, you might be told that we're going to go after it with the most aggressive chemotherapy we have, which is like a couple of days of carrying a pack around that's putting poison in your system for those 2 days. Or you might be offered a more gentle chemotherapy with less toxicity. Sometimes that's the option that's offered to somebody in their 70s or 80s, just as kind of a palliative thing. It's all palliative in stage 4 pancreatic cancer. There's no such thing as a curative strategy from the traditional medical oncology world. They do not have a cure. They do not have a cure for GBM, for glioblastoma, brain cancer. They don't have a cure. It's all palliative. People don't understand that. They hear aggressive treatment. They're thinking, well, I can live for a lot longer. But that's not necessarily the case. It might be 2 months longer with a severely impacted quality of life. It might be no longer at all because their bodies just couldn't handle it. Their bodies broke down under the burden of it. So, it's individual. I wish.
Some hope.
What's that?
I said at least keto offers some hope.
Oh, God, yeah, for a response. It improves the response of any other therapy that's out there.
And also, it's wonderful because it falls into the realm of self-help. And so often when you have cancer, you're in the realm of extreme expertise of people who are doing things that you can barely understand, but you've put your life into their hands. And most people want to have some part in their own treatment. Some don't.
Absolutely.
But if you do, then obviously this is something you should look into. So the book is Keto for Cancer. The author is Miriam Kalamian, who also offers nutritional counseling to people who are looking to have expert opinion about how to implement a diet. And obviously not just a diet, but you have much to offer people with cancer. So I want to thank you, Miriam. Thank you so much for being on our podcast and also for everything that you do and everything that you've done. and to turn that unbelievably difficult situation, a horrible situation of losing your own child to cancer. It's almost inconceivable how you've come back from that and made something that is a gift to the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We would like to take a moment to thank our Patreon subscribers for helping to make this program possible. If you would like to have access to exclusive content, including transcriptions, episode recaps, and special offers, become a patron today at patreon.com/mossreports.